That should be about it. As soon as, when we're ready, we'll let people into the meeting. We're not there yet, right? 4 o'clock.
Right.
Okay.
And I don't know if she wants to stand behind the wall. Yeah. Come on.
Like when people get, I don't know what else to do really. I mean, I could just sit down while, like, the camera doesn't need to see me all the time, does it?
Yeah, but the microphone that you're using is.
But I mean, while
is
she's
that-
reading, I'm saying,
Oh,
and then I could just step back up.
right. I think that would work pretty well. If we just set it for like, so everybody can set it to like speaker view so that if they just want to see the one person speaking, that's on every view.
Mhm.
As for right here, we could,
I mean, I know this is the mic here, so.
Yeah.
For the Zoom people.
yes, and so that should work. Is there going to be anything going on out in the room or?
There'll be question and answers later, but I can repeat them.
That's probably best in this venue to do it that way.
I mean, does that mic work? I
I
know that they
works.
won't hear it, but I might hear it better.
Yeah, so that one actually, it's very similar to that, but that one's actually better.
Okay, I meant for passing to the.
Oh, to passing the people, you can pass the handheld and it comes over the speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah. and
That way, I
But it won't
will-
go through the Zoom.
Right.
that's fine, I can repeat it.
Check 1, 2.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
First of all, thank you for helping with this. It's really important. Will there be any opportunity to do a pan, get some sort of view of the people who are physically present in the room?
Sure, I can turn the camera.
Yeah, the only way, the camera's right here.
Yes.
and just to try to not make you dizzy, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. That would be really lovely. So,
I mean, we could just leave it like that.
Yeah, if you want to.
That's true.
It doesn't need to be,
Yeah.
I mean,
like a split screen.
Are we gonna pin
I could
her
stand
or
here.
just spotlight her?
What's that again?
Are we going to spotlight her?
We could do that.
Because there's gonna be a number of other people on soon, so.
We could, are they gonna be speaking as well or not really?
Not unless they have
Unless
questions.
it's towards that.
So yeah, spotlight's probably the best way to do it then, or pin. So we'll see instead of us like that.
How will I know when people ask questions though, will
They should, as a meeting, they should just pop on
Okay.
to, and then they'll be in the smaller
I? Okay,
window.
oh, okay,
as they-
great. That's,
We had 25 people in the Zoom, 24. And 22 in the waiting room. I guess that's probably part of the same.
What do you think? Or do you think I should leave this gallery and pin her?
People can watch it however they want to watch it.
Yeah.
It's-
Well, I'm just saying in this room, instead of having her, like to have the gallery and then have her pin would be a little bit, it's hard to see because the other people aren't here yet.
mhm.
But we'll have like essentially a gallery view, and if we pin her, she'll be bigger, kind of like the spotlight idea.
Mhm.
But we'll see other people a little easier than just this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the way we should do it. And she has pins, and that should be fine. So it'll just as people join. Oh, it is 4.
Yeah,
Do you want to go ahead and open up?
sure.
I'm gonna get mine. What's that? Yeah. That should be bigger enough.
So she's only pinned.
But they could,
That's fine.
like, they're not the people online. We can. let them-
The people can already see, just to let you know, the 30 people I have waving and greeting and stuff. just to let you know.
Thank you. See,
Do it this way.
the problem is by sticking, let me just turn the camera.
Yeah, while you're speaking.
Because if I move away from this,
Yeah.
and go just for now.
Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm waving back at you all who have been waving to us. I'm Simone Forche. I'm professor of history and international relations here at Bucknell. I'm also the director of the Griot Institute for the Study of Black Lives and Cultures. And I will introduce our event today, our speaker, and speak a little bit about the work that we do here. So the Griot Institute for the Study of Black Lives and Cultures provides faculty and students here on campus and our wider community with intellectual and creative engagement through the interdisciplinary investigation of critical analyses of the cultures, hopefully you guys can hear me, histories, narratives, peoples, geographies, and arts of Africa and its diasporas. Our work is a collaborative enterprise devoted primarily to the interdisciplinary exploration of aesthetics, artistic, and scholarly cultural products, and the intellectual currents of past and present Black communities in all of their diverse configurations. The Griot Institute embraces narratives as a thematic and theoretical framework for its projects and programming. And for those of you with us from Western Africa or who know much about Western African history, Griot is an iconic figure in West African history and narrative. They are the tellers of history. So the inaugural director of the Griot Institute was Dr. Carmen Gillespie, who was a professor of English here at Bucknell. And after forming the Toni Morrison Society, was based here at Bucknell. And when it moved to Ohio, Professor Gillespie had the vision, a very grand vision of a project to infuse campus with contributions of Black students, artists, scholars, thought leaders, social transformers, and community builders. And part of that project was a book series. Our speaker today is the last author whose work Professor Gillespie acquired. So it was her last acquisition. And though you cannot see her, she's in the room today, Suzanne Guillot, who is the director of the Bucknell Press, really saw this book through to publication after Professor Gillespie passed away suddenly 2 years ago. So I think that Professor Gillespie's vision for this project that just came to fruition in July of 2021 through the work of Shani Stepikoff fits very well into Professor Gillespie's vision. And I wanted to read a little bit from one of her final works that she herself wrote, a book of poetry called The Blueback Wet of Wood, which she has a sort of intro to that is a dedication to a dear friend of hers. But she talks a bit about what I think her vision of Black lives and cultures, even in the midst of death, really means, and the ways in which we have to celebrate Black life, in the same ways that testimony does. So Professor Gillespie wrote, on October 4th of 2012, our daughter's 5th birthday, my husband, Harold Baxt, was diagnosed with stage 4 sarcomatoid renal cell carcinoma following a routine physical, and he died 3 months and 3 weeks later. Until Henry's diagnosis and death, I didn't realize the extent to which a life shared with another can be dismembered and beheaded, leaving in its wake a psychological and experiential rupture that requires reassembling a self, a life, and a new way to walk in the world. One of the strategies that I used to begin to reimagine life was to commit to writing a poem every single day. And she goes on and talks about how a friend of hers read those poems and how those poems became this book that she wrote, The Blue Black Wet of Wood. And so now I want to turn to the celebration of our current author and how, and I think that you'll see how her own work connects to the work of Professor Gillespie and the vision that she had. So Shanice Stepikoff earned a bachelor's degree in English, summa cum laude, from the University of Maine, and she has a Master of Fine Art in Creative Writing from the New School. In addition to her creative endeavors, she also holds a PhD in clinical psychology that she earned in 2019. And in 2019, she received the National Association for Poetry Therapy's Outstanding Educator Award. Prior to discovering her vocation as a late blooming literary scholar, she was the psychologist for the UN-backed War Crimes Tribunal in Sierra Leone, from which this book of poetry testimony comes. Between 2005 and 2007, she was part of the tribunal, and she served as a psychologist trainer for CVT, which was an NGO that focuses on survivors of politically motivated torture. First, she did this work in Guinea and later in Jordan. Shanice's essay, Hiding in Plain Sight, Judeophobia in Swift's Portrayal of the Yahoos in Gulliver's Travels, was published in Swift Studies in 2020. And her first book that we will hear from today was just published in July of 2021 by Bucknell University Press in the Griot series. Shani won Reed Magazine's 2017 Creative Nonfiction Award and was the third place winner of the Eckelberg Review's 2014 Gertrude Stein Award. She's written academic articles for a variety of journals, including the Drama Review, Journal of Human Rights Practice, and the International Journal of Transnational Justice. She's done many things in her life, but I think that you can begin to see the interdisciplinary way in which she does her work, combining her work in psychology with her artistic and poetic work. So I will turn the microphone over to Professor Stepikoff and allow her to now share her work with you.
Thank you so much for the generous introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I'm seeing some people that I haven't seen in decades, and it's really special, and others that are new friends, hopefully. I just want to go through some acknowledgements and thanks to people, and then I'll be reading a bit from the introduction, and then I'll be reading a pretty long segment from one poem, and then we'll be taking questions and answers. I'll go through the thanks pretty quickly so we'll have more time for the other parts. I'd like to thank everyone at the Griot Institute for the study of Black lives and culture, for hosting today's event and for bringing out the book. In particular, Michelle Laver, the program manager at the Institute, who took care of most of the arrangements for today's event, and Dr. Simone Forchet, the director of the Institute and associate professor of history and international relations at Bucknell. I would like to take a moment myself also and acknowledge Dr. Carmen R. Gillespie. May her soul rest in peace and may her spirit be with us today. Dr. Gillespie was professor of English at Bucknell, and as Dr. Forchet was just saying, she was the founder and director of the Griot Institute and editor of the Griot Project book series. She was also a brilliant literary scholar, writer, and poet. In March 2019, I reached out to Carmen to ask if she would consider publishing this work. She was receptive and encouraging, open-minded and open-hearted. In the spring of 2019, she read some of the poems and she invited me to send her the whole manuscript. And in July, she informed me she was sending it out for review. But to everyone's sorrow, she didn't live to see the book brought out. I feel, however, that she believed in its value, and it would be a great honor if this book could be considered part of her legacy. I'd also like to thank everyone at Bucknell University Press, especially Suzanne Guillot, the director and editor-in-chief. Suzanne generously stepped in to carry the project forward after Carmen's untimely passing. She showed patience, talent, erudition while editing the book and recruited 2 readers who gave very helpful suggestions. I'd like to thank Pam Daly, the managing editor at Bucknell, for countless steps needed to shepherd the project to fruition. Dr. Ernest Cole kindly provided the foreword to the book, and he's here on the call on the Zoom today. Dr. Cole is professor of English at Hope College in Michigan. He is originally from Sierra Leone. He has authored several scholarly books focusing on Sierra Leone, and he also conducts research on trauma studies, disability studies, and on post-apartheid South Africa. I'd like to thank the artist, Pape Solomon, for creating the beautiful oil painting that appears on the cover, and it also appeared on your invitation to this event. It's a painting titled Free Speech. Pape and I first met in a refugee camp in Guinea, and he was a child then in 2004. And he's now a rising star in the art world in Phoenix, Arizona. And it's deeply meaningful to me that he did the cover for this book. Eve Siegel, the graphic designer. I like to thank Lori Scheck, my creative writing mentor at the New School and author of 5 poetry collections and 2 works of hybrid fiction. Lori showed me new possibilities for poetic craft, helped me honor and hone my vision for this project, and provided astute feedback on successive drafts. Also, my extraordinary daughter, Yana Seri, who couldn't be with us today because she's a teacher now in Brooklyn, but we were living together until last month. She helped me discern the nuances of the Creole words in the transcripts, and she's been a caring, supportive presence throughout the 10 years I've worked on these poems. Also, the folks at Rutgers University Press who handled the production and distribution, especially Daryl Bauer, my production editor, Barbara Goodhouse, copy editor, and Angela Pilioris, who prepared the manuscript for publication. My close friend, the filmmaker, writer, director, and educator, Alric Brown, who helped me during the early process of poring through literally hundreds of lengthy trial transcripts in deciding which ones I would use. Emily Shearer, who advised me on the introduction. Lila Colburn, who helped me overcome a decades-long writer's block and provided moral support throughout. Also, the writers who provided blurbs for the book, Aminata Forna, Ben Ferenz, who's now 101 years old and the last surviving prosecutor at the Nuremberg Tribunal, who lives in Florida and New York now, Lori Scheck, Remy Raji, the Nigerian poet, and Fred Marchant. I also thank Brenda Hillman for believing in the work and encouraging me to present it at a conference and to pursue it further. That really gave me confidence to go forward during a time when I did not yet consider myself a writer or a poet. So thank you. I'd also like to call your attention to the work of writers and poets who are from Sierra Leone or have ties there, who have also written about the war and its aftermath in their own ways. And these individuals and their work are described in a section of the book titled Further Resources. I'd like to thank my colleagues from the Special Court for Sierra Leone, especially those who were part of the witness support team. And 3 are here today, Nene Berry, Miata Abu, and Monty Cisse. And finally, my deepest acknowledgement goes to the men and women who testified in the Special Court. Unlike some courts, they were not subpoenaed or forced to appear. They did so voluntarily in order to bear witness. And I also am very surprised, and I just want to mention that my very first mentor from when I was very young, fresh out of college, 21 years old or 22 years old, when I first went to South Africa to conduct a study on apartheid torture victims, Ishmael Makabela is here on the Zoom today. We haven't seen each other in many years, and I just noticed he's here, and he was a really important mentor to me. So thanks for being here also. And if I forgot anyone, please forgive me, because if you've ever created a book, you will know that it takes a village to create a book. It's one thing that I learned. So I'll go ahead and read from the introduction. And for those of you who have the book, the part that I'm going to read starts on page 6. And the introduction is a pretty important way of contextualizing the book. It might be confusing if you were to just jump right in. And so I think this part will help situate it better for when I go on to read one of the poems. We will have question and answer after that. So feel free to formulate any questions that you might want to pose. And it could either be for me or for others who are present as well. So the first part of the introduction, I talk a little bit about how certain phrases would strike me. And I felt like it was important to pause and reflect on them, that in a situation of war, people start to habituate to certain things and you almost forget to pay attention. One of those phrases was where someone had said, in Kano, that's a particular location in Sierra Leone, in Kano, when they chop off people's hands, we use tobacco leaf, to tie it at the wounded place. And the person kept talking from there. And I felt like, wait a minute. Let's press the pause button. Let's slow this down, because are we not paying attention to what we're hearing? Are we forgetting how to listen? That it's become so normal to cut off someone's hand or limb that you're just talking about which kind of leaf to use on that place. So that got me thinking a lot about how to use repetition and slow things down so we could really hear what we're hearing. And I go on from there in the introduction. After that initial effort, Rainer Maria Rilke's series of poems titled The Voices became a key source of inspiration. In Rilke's collection, the experiences of the marginalized or wounded were given expression. I modeled my effort on Rilke's, but focused on experiences that were specifically relevant to the Sierra Leone War. I chose to use only prosecution witnesses, though many witnesses for the defense also had compelling stories. And just as Rilke had called attention to those whose suffering had been obscured, I chose to use only the testimony of victims, with the single exception of a former child combatant who was both a victim and a perpetrator. According to the pioneering trauma theorist Judith Herman, silence, the absence of language, is a core component of trauma. What is required for the repair of individual psyches in the aftermath of severe atrocities, as well as for the repair of the communities and countries in which individuals are embedded, is both a language and an audience. Indeed, autobiography theorist Lee Gilmore describes the presence of a narrator and a narrative and a listener as the constitutive elements of the testimonial form. The survivor must not merely speak, but rather must address other people, specifically those who are not only willing, but determined to hear and to know. This is the broader, deeper meaning of testimony. To bear witness does not necessarily imply participating in a legal or juridical proceeding. To bear witness implies the existence of a speaker, a committed listener, and a language. Yet even when speakers do narrate their experiences to attentive listeners, over time, many details fade from public awareness as survivors attempt to rebuild their lives and as the wider community, both local and global, starts to focus on other priorities. As I became aware of the risk that these voices would become less vivid in the minds of listeners, readers, and in the historical record, I realized that Gertrude Stein's technique of repetition could make it possible for readers to stay mentally and morally present to the anguished and anguishing reports. Additionally, intentional written repetition seemed compatible with the penchant many Sierra Leoneans show for restating the main components of an oral narrative. Further, the reiteration of specific phrases hints at a quality displayed by trauma survivors in a wide range of settings when they mentally reflect on or speak aloud about their experiences, namely, to revisit those aspects that are hardest to fathom. During the period I created these poems, I had no conscious knowledge of Charles Reznikoff's work composing found poems from the transcripts of the War Crimes Tribunal at Nuremberg and the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem. When much later I stumbled upon his book, Holocaust, I was struck by the similarities between his project and mine. I became even more intrigued when I discovered an uncanny coincidence. Reznikoff had published an earlier collection based on criminal proceedings in the United States with the same title I had already chosen for the Sierra Leone poems, Testimony. I had to ask myself, how is it possible that two individuals writing about events that took place in such different eras and in very different parts of the world arrived at the same method of making poems that attest to these events? As I read more about Reznikoff's process of composing the Holocaust poems, and as I continued to reflect on my own experiences in South Africa and Sierra Leone, I gradually gained a deeper understanding of the impulse to use found language in poems about war and mass violence. We were attempting to structure and contain the horror of the accounts by giving them aesthetic form. Eventually, I concluded that there may be something specific to situations of large-scale violence that lead poets to draw from pre-existing language rather than generate entirely new utterances. In situations of atrocity, one function of the writer is to bear witness. Yet many writers find it impossible to describe the events they have encountered. Perhaps this is why Charles Reznikoff waited until 30 years after the Holocaust to compose his found poems about victims. Eventually, I came to learn that while Reznikoff was an early trailblazer of this literary genre, his approach was derived from a larger tradition that became a recognized art form during the early 20th century. Found poetry is defined as the selection and rearrangement of words, phrases, or passages contained in extant sources and reimagined as poems. A found poem begins to emerge as a reader or listener attunes to poetic properties within a text. Variations on this approach have been used in the aftermath of mass violence across cultures and eras. There are moving examples based on texts from the Atlantic slave trade, the Armenian genocide, the anti-Jewish pogroms in the Russian Empire, the American Civil War, and more recently, the Iraq War, as well as racial violence in the United States. This approach to poem making shares with found art in other modalities the aims of contributing to public awareness of the realities of war and generating creative responses. Though the antecedents of found poetry are more than a century old, there has been growing interest during the past 2 decades as the internet, social media, and smartphones have made it possible for more and more people to gain access to public documents. So that's just a little bit of the context and the introduction. And there are lots of other examples besides this book of the use of found poetry. I know one poem that was a mixture of found and not found that influenced me was a poem called Dragon Skin by Brenda Hillman in her Practical Water collection that was based on her sitting in on congressional hearings about the Iraq War. And she quotes directly from what the congressman and the salesman and so forth were saying about this particular type of material. And it just causes you to sort of pause and reflect, what am I hearing? What is being said? And there are many, many other examples. Tracy K. Smith has some powerful examples in her recent collection, and lots of others. So I think what I'll do is go ahead and shift now into reading from one of the poems. And the poems tend to be long. They're almost like short stories, although they're true, so they're not fiction. And I do want to give a kind of trigger warning, especially for those of you who might be from the region, from Sierra Leone or Liberia in particular. If you think you might be overwhelmed because some of the material in the poem is harsh and relates obviously directly to the war, please feel free to turn the volume down if you don't feel able to hear it for now, and you can always turn it back up afterwards. I'll give a hand signal when I'm done reading the poem. So if you don't feel you're in the headspace right now to hear a difficult material, anyone, not just people directly affected, you should feel free to know that's part of the poem. So this is from the first poem in the book called The Amputee's Mother. And for those of you who have the book, it starts on page 17, and I'll be reading for about 10 or 11 minutes. And I'm going to start at the bottom of that page. And I think, as most of you probably know, if you know a little bit about the book, the poems are all directly created from public transcripts of trials that were in a UN-backed war crimes tribunal after an 11-year war in Sierra Leone. There were a series of trials to prosecute people believed to have created, carried the responsibility for committing war atrocities. And then I worked with these transcripts to distill them and shape them into poems. But the words themselves are all from the transcripts. Okay. The rebels instructed me to go with them. They placed us on the veranda, myself and my children. When they placed us on the veranda, my child was crying because of the fragment that hurt him, cut him. The other rebel came and saw the child crying. He saw blood oozing out of his chest. Then the rebel boy asked, "What is this?" I told him, "My child has been hurt by a fragment." Then he looked at it and said, "This is nothing." It was not very long before another one came, holding two sneakers in his arm. He slapped my jaw with them. He slapped my cheek. Then he told me to wait. Yes, my children saw. We were seated there when another rebel came running. So many people were there on that veranda. My children were with me. I was unable to leave them behind. There was no way for me to escape because the rebels were present, and they were many. I didn't feel so fine. That is, in our village, we don't allow that kind of thing. Even my husband has never done that to me, to beat me with his shoes. To take a shoe and beat someone is only good for a dog. In our village, we don't do that. When we were seated there, after a while, another rebel, a boy, came running. He saw a girl standing by me. When he saw this girl, he said, "Hey, lie down on the ground." The girl began to plead. He said, "Lie down on the ground." The girl started begging. He told the girl, "Lie down." The girl fell to the ground. He started pulling her clothes off and removing his pants. Afterwards, he said, "Get up." The girl stood up. He said, "This girl, we will take her along. We are taking her away." They told us to stand up and follow under the cotton tree. When we arrived at the cotton tree, we saw their boss man there, seated on a rock. When we arrived at the cotton tree, their commander, their boss man, ordered us to sit on the ground. I had my child on my back. Their boss was there under the cotton tree. He sat on a rock. They had tied two men already. They were properly tied. They have took their hands and brought them on their backs and tied them. After they were tied and were lying on the floor, we sat down. Their boss man, the commander who sat on the rock, began to speak. "Since you say you love a civil government, we are going to chop off your hands. We will not let you go free. If we don't chop off your hands, we're going to kill you." Well, my heart was in a tremendous situation because we saw dead individuals under the cotton tree. One of the men killed there was stripped naked as he was in his birthday suit. I tried to look at him, but when I saw him like that, I had to turn my face. The others were lying down by him. I cannot tell the number. There were many. I cannot tell the number. So the boss man said, "These ones, if you don't kill them, cut off their hands because they say they want a civil government. If you are ready to cut off their hands, begin with the child so that they will know that they will not be spared." He was referring to my child. Well, their boss man had given the order, said that his hand should be cut. At that time, my child was small. He didn't understand what the man was saying. My child was 6 years old. The man told these other rebel boys, "Go for a machete and come with it." A rebel boy went. When he came back, he said he hadn't got a knife. The boss man ordered him, "Go fetch a knife, and when you come with it, start with the little child." The rebel boy took off to search for a machete. When he left, the boss man rose. When the rebel boy returned, he called the child, "Come." Then the child began weeping. The child began weeping. As he was cutting the child was weeping. The child was saying, "Oh, mother, they have cut my hand. Oh, mother, they have cut my hand." Then the rebel boy threw my child on the floor. After he'd cut my son's hand, he came and sat near me. When he sat near me, he pulled me up and said, "Come on, come here." He laid me on the ground. He chopped off my hand. Then he said, "Come on, get up, go sit down there." I sat with my child, the blood oozing out. The other man came and said, well, now you are beautiful. It is now that you're beautiful. Right now where you are very beautiful. And I said, no human being can look at me and say I'm beautiful. My child was sitting, the blood oozing out just like a cut has been opened. His body wet, blood all over. We sat there. This boy who had chopped off my hand and had chopped off my child's hand, when I tried to look at him, he said, if you look at me, I will chop off the other hand. So I stopped looking at him. We were seated there. Then I was going and I was dropping, I was kind of dizzy, dropping as I went along. As I stumbled and fell, this same man was still chasing me, telling me I'm beautiful now. When I reached a particular place, I sat down. My child fainted and I fell down. My child was falling down and he said, Mama, I want to drink. He said, Mama, I want to drink. At the time, there was no water close by. At that time, I was still feeling dizzy. I sat close to him. After some time, I would get up. And I told him I was going to fetch water for him, but I was still dizzy. And I went. I went to one way or another, and I saw a kettle there with some water in it. I took that water, and I came to where my child was lying down. I sat on the floor, and I raised him with one hand. I called him, and I sat close to him. I gave him the water. After he drank, I drank the rest. And I sat down on the floor and I told him to come onto my back so I could strap him. I strapped him on my back. As we were going, I had this child on my back, and my other child who was behind me was crying because he was hungry. I laid him down and I went and fetched one mango. I came with it, I peeled it, but because there was blood on it, as I wanted to give the child, as I wanted to give it to him so he would eat it and become lively a little bit, he would refuse to eat it because, according to him, there was blood on it. I told him that you should lie down for the moment because fighting was going on. As we were lying down there, it was not long when we heard someone say, time, time, time. The time has come, we should go. We heard some voices from afar coupled with gun sounds. I got up, took my child, and strapped him on my back. When I reached a particular place, I laid him down because I was so tired. When I laid him down there, I found some leaves and covered his wound with them to ward off the flies. I was so tired. Then I looked for a road that would reach the farm road where my husband had gone to work. But my mate who had escaped had already gone to the farm and told my husband. So my husband came, he started crying. My mother also came and started crying. My friend Fina Dabo, my mother and my husband, they strapped the child. My mother took some water, washed my body of the blood that had been on my body. They strapped me on their back and strapped the child on their back together with me and took us to the farm. When we reached the farm, we slept there. We sought advice from one old man because there was no medicine. The old man said, in Kano, when they chop off people's hands, we use tobacco leaf to tie it round the wounded place. In Kano, when they chop off people's hands, we use tobacco leaf. At that time, my husband had tobacco leaves, so he brought them out and tied them round my wound. In the morning, I strapped my child on my back, and as the pain was about to overpower me, I would put him down. After some time, I would strap him again on my back. When he'd start crying, I would strap him on my back. When I'd reach a particular place, I'd put him down. That's how we went until we reached one village. That's where we slept. In the morning, we went. As we entered the townspeople said, it is good that you have tried hard to reach here. There's a helicopter on its way. When it comes, it will take you along. It is good. that you tried hard to reach here. It was not long before we heard the chopper, the sound of the chopper, and the chopper landed in the field. They took us where the chopper was, and we came here to Freetown. When we came here to Freetown, we were taken by car to a hospital. The day that we reached here, that was not the day they did the operation. On the Monday, they took me to the theater and I was operated on, myself and my child. After long, one day, the child asked me, Mama, when will my hand grow again? After long, one day the child asked me, Mama, when will my hand grow again? After long, one day the child asked me, Mama, when will my hand grow again? So, thank you for listening, and thank you for giving attention. I know it's very intense material, so it's normal if it takes a while to sort of be with it and absorb it. I've been working with these narratives for 10 years, so it still affects me. But I would like to have a chance to open it up for questions, and I'll put my hand up so those who might have turned their volume down will know that I finished reading the poem. We've got other people here that I mentioned who could also answer questions, and I'm glad to answer questions as well. Oh, I see a message from Dr. Forche directly to me, telling me that there's a problem with the technology. That's kind of a pity, but it looks like they're working on it. So I guess we have to wait and hold on. I guess I'll just wait. I'll take a quick look at in the chat in case there's any questions that people put in the chat. Okay.
Can you guys hear us?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know, our whole system shut down for a bit. Okay, we're back. Continue.
Okay,
I'm
thank
not
you.
sure if other people on the Zoom could still hear you, but
okay. Could they hear me when I was reading the poem?
Oh yeah, I heard you all the way to the end of the poem.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I'd like to open it up for questions and answers. And like I said, besides myself, in case you want to pose questions to some others who are present, we have a few people who worked with witnesses at the special court who are present. And we have, Remy Raji's here too, the Nigerian poet who gave a blurb for the book. I haven't seen you in so long. Thank you for being here all the way from Nigeria. So Remy had we'll go by his pen name. Remy Raji has several of his own poetry books and is a scholar at the University of Ibadan. But I see some other people. Pape Solomon, the cover artist, is here. Several of the people I mentioned are here. Dr. Ernest Cole, who did the foreword. So if you can pose your question to me or to others.
Shanae, may we ask you in person?
Sure, of course.
Oh, thank you, Shanae. I agree with others who have written extraordinarily moving and powerful. What I would like to ask you, if I may, is how do you, as a writer and a practicing psychologist, understand the conveyance of trauma into language, let alone aestheticization?
Thank you for that question.
Well, Shanae, really, that was a gift what you gave. So I thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
I mean,
Well, Judith Herman in her book Trauma and Recovery, which is one of the best books I've read on trauma, talks about that there's a double impact of trauma. And I talk about this a little in the introduction. It simultaneously creates a desire to speak and an inability to speak. So that's sort of the paradox. And you can see this even like in developmental psychology. You could see like a 2-year-old, as soon as they're learning to speak and they fall off the couch or something, and they'll start trying to tell someone, I fell, I hurt myself, or something. And Zora Neale Hurston talks about that too in Their Eyes Are Watching God. She says that it's the oldest human longing to tell of one's story or one's suffering. How it gets translated into language is, sort of if I understood your question correctly, is a very complex, arduous kind of task. And for a lot of people, it never does. I mean, a lot of people, they will go to their grave with sort of their story untold and unknown. But I think for artists, they try to bring it forth in some artistic way, whether it be poetry, whether it be theater, photography, painting. Sometimes it's not verbal words, sometimes it's a nonverbal representation, dance even. But some people just do it in their own psychotherapy. But I do think that if you don't find a way to give it form, it has a tendency to cause harm and to be psychologically damaging. That's my own view. I know some people might disagree. Am I answering your question?
you really are, Sunny, and I'm
Okay,
being
you.
very greedy, but may I ask you a piggyback question?
Sure, of course, sure.
I promise I'll be quiet for a
That's
while.
okay.
Thank you. I wanted to ask too, so you have answered my question, and I look forward to talking more about this with you in the future years that we have together. But there's the notion of then testimony, witnessing, which is also speaking for an other's trauma. How do you understand that in relation to poetic vocation?
Yeah, that's another really big question, because there's a couple of different perspectives on it. There are people who think that a testimonial poem refers only to what you yourself went through directly, and that's your own testimony. And then there are people who think that a testimonial poem can be vicarious, what you have heard vicariously, what you have borne witness to, what you have known about, by visiting different places or encountering people or hearing people's stories. And that is another kind of testimony. I think in this book it was kind of a mixture, because it was the real testimonies of the people, but at the same time, and this is the meaning of the Coleridge epigraph. The book starts out with an epigraph by Coleridge that says, since then at an uncertain hour that agony returns, until my ghastly tale is told, this heart within me burns. Well, originally it's the direct people's tale, but when you've heard it, in a way, it also becomes your tale in a sense, because you're also carrying it, you're carrying those voices, you're carrying those stories, and there is also kind of a desire to bring them forth. Thank you for the question.
Are there any questions here in the room or others on Zoom who would like to ask a question? While people are thinking, I can just, I know that the one thing that you were talking a lot about, the idea of repetition. What I notice is the book of poems and begins with a statement of, I am a farmer and my husband is a farmer. And the entire book ends with, I used to be a fisherman.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about, and there's another spot where it says something like, we were training, I am now learning a new trade. So I was just thinking about the, obviously it's about trauma and the war, but then there are these moments of like these mundane things or everyday things. And I was wondering, you and I had spoke on Friday a little bit, and just thinking about the idea of life and how people are grappling with that at the same time that they're giving these testimonies.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Simone. Yeah, well, one thing that's really important to me, and I think it's important in general, is that you don't come away from this book only thinking about trauma and only thinking about war. Because what I hope was evident in the poem is the incredible resilience. I mean, imagine the resilience of the speaker in that poem. I can't even imagine that level of resilience, that your own arm has been amputated, your child's arm has been amputated, and you're going along, finding water, finding a mango, strapping the child on your back with one arm, trying to manage the wound. You're walking long distances, I mean, and somehow you've got this incredible, and it's not to glorify it or sugarcoat it, because the harm and the suffering are very real. But I think the resilience and the strength of spirit is really, really remarkable. And then, we come to the point you were making, Simone, about the everyday. People are trying to live their lives, but there's a before and an after. So there's this wonderful man. I remember him very vividly. He was a fisherman, and now he has to work only as a beggar. He obviously can no longer be a fisherman because of the amputations. So that's obviously an irrevocable change in one's life. But there were many examples of people who found some way to create a meaningful life in spite of their injuries, whether psychological or physical injuries. I know there was one man, he's not featured in the book though, but he used to be a baker. And after the war, when he could no longer do the baking himself, he was able to supervise other people in a bakery and actually have a successful bakery in that way. So again, it's not to sugarcoat it, because the losses are real, but there is also tremendous resilience and capacity to somehow find a way to go on living and actually to create a meaningful life. The ties among neighbors are often close. The ties among extended family are often close. So in some ways, I'd rather have an injury like that in Sierra Leone than in the United States, even though the United States has maybe more of a political safety net in some ways, but in Sierra Leone, there tends to be, I think, more social support. Does that respond at all to your question?
Mm-hmm. I'll also ask, there's a question in the chat that was asking about how many voices are shared in that part of the story that you read. Is it really literally one woman telling a story, interspersing various experiences?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm so glad to have a chance to clarify that. Thank you for the question. So each poem is one specific witness testifying. So it's that witness's testimony. Often it was over a period of several days, and the original transcripts are, often hundreds of pages. And below the title of each poem, it gives the particular witnesses dates of testimony, which trial they testified in, because there were several trials at the special court, and what their ID number was. So each poem represents just one testimony. Of course, within that testimony, they may be mentioning lots of different things that were said to them. So you're indirectly getting lots of other people's voices, but that's secondary. Each poem is one testimony. There is at the very end of the book a blank page that is just it's just called The Victim of War. You can see it's just one blank page with just a title. And I did that on purpose. It's not that the book is missing a page or something. I did that on purpose to sort of try to encourage people to sit with the experience of absence, and to sit with the experience of silence, and to sit with the experience of those who actually did not survive, because the other poems in the book are all people who survived. They survived to come and testify, but it's important to also, be able to sit with the fact that we won't hear all of the stories because so many people were killed in the war. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Are there questions here in the room? Comments? You're on Zoom?
I think there's a bunch of questions in the chat. I have not been able to
have
look
one.
at the chat. Oh, Kathy. Okay. Hi,
Yeah.
Kathy.
Go ahead.
Hi, Shani. Yes, when I was lucky enough to come to Sierra Leone to work with your staff for a short amount of time, I was struck with the what I observed in terms of folks did not want to talk about it much to me, and I don't know if because was an outsider, whether that was true, but they didn't seem to talk about it much with each other or to me. And I wonder what you make of that. And I was thinking, if you didn't, thank God that you were telling the story, their stories, because I think they need to be told. And so I wondered your reaction to that.
Thank you for the question, Kathy. I think of myself as kind of amplifying their stories, because I think they really had the courage to come to the court and tell their stories. So I think of myself almost as a kind of vehicle for trying to just amplify the stories and shape them so they can reach, a wider public in a sense. But yeah, the issue of not wanting to talk about the war, I think there's two aspects to it. Number one, when you came that time, we were right in the middle of a series of really intense prosecutions and trials, and every day, all day for 8 or 10 hours a day, the staff you were working with was hearing these testimonies. So I think when they were in their downtime, participating in classes and workshops and stuff that you were giving, they didn't want to talk about the war. So that makes sense. I think afterwards, people do want there to be a historical record, and most of the Sierra Leoneans I've talked to appreciate that. They might not want to talk about it personally in their free time, but they want there to be an awareness and a record. The other thing is it really varies by person. At the special court, people were not forced to come. So it's a very select group of people. The people who testified were those who wanted to come and share their story. Investigators would go to different communities after the war and ask, tell them we have this court, there are going to be trials. Does anybody want to come and tell their story? And a lot of people wouldn't, so those who wanted to tell their story could, but others had not much interest in doing that, if that makes sense. So.
And could I just ask, was there much of a reconciliation process throughout the nation after this?
Oh, that's a great question too. Well, it's interesting. People get a bit confused. And I think in Dr. Cole's wonderful introduction, he alludes to this, he refers to this a bit, and he might even want to speak to this if we have time. But besides the special court, which was based on an criminal justice kind of approach of holding people accountable, it was based on precedent in international law going all the way back to Nuremberg. There was in Sierra Leone also a Truth and Reconciliation Commission modeled on the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but not as successful in most people's minds. But that was a different sort of process where it was not based on convicting people of crimes and placing them in prison and so forth. It was based on trying to promote some type of reconciliation. I think there has been a lot of forgiveness, or if not full forgiveness, then just finding a way to learn to live together. It's a small country with a fairly small population, so people sort of have to try. One thing that I think is impressive, there has been some ethnic and political violence, fairly small scale. There has not been another war since this war ended in 2001, 2002. There has not been, 2002, there has not been another war. And I mean, that's longer than the Middle East has ever gone without a war. You know, that's almost 20 years. So I do think that's an achievement, although there are still a lot of problems, and I don't want to pretend that everything's fine.
Thank you.
I think Andre had a
I
question.
was just going to say, because I know some people have to go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I want to note that it is 5 o'clock. We'll stay on. The author has time to respond to more questions, she told me earlier. So we'll stay on, but anyone who needs to leave. But I saw that Professor Cole and Andre both had their hands up. So Professor Cole, would you like to? Speak?
Yes, thank you so much. And congratulations again, Shani, on such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for the forward again.
Oh, thank you. I want to go quickly to the question of unwillingness of the survivors to speak that Kathy mentioned. And I think there are a number of reasons or ways in which we can approach this question. To tell a story, in many ways, a story that has to do with the harrowing experiences of survivors, is to relive in many ways that experience itself. And given the nature of the atrocities and the mayhem, it takes a particular mindset of courage or resilience, as Shani says, to inhabit that space again and to relive those experiences. So on one level, it's a question of memory or forgetting. It's a question of not only what we want to remember, but also how we choose to remember. Or again, I mean, framed another way, it's a question of how much we want to remember. So the reluctance of survivors may have to do with this struggle between what to remember and how to remember the atrocities that they encountered. But on another level, and I think my countrywoman, my countryman, Aminata Fona, is talking about this, especially in her novel, Happiness, is something to do with the culture of Sierra Leone. In a sense in which we must begin to try to grapple with what silence means. A silence protest, a silence resistance, or a silence merely a coping mechanism that survivors would want to use to sort of transcend or overcome the atrocities encountered. And I say this in ways in which, because the issue of stigma is real. And given the nature of some of the atrocities, I think in some instances, it's more a question of wanting to escape, to avoid stigma. And so the silence again could come in as coping mechanism. So I guess what I'm saying here is there's a variety of ways in which we can begin to understand or contextualize what silence means, or why survivors of the Civil War would choose not to speak up in some of the situations.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you've really captured it with much more nuance and sophistication than I did. I appreciate that. Yeah, I agree with you completely. You've been able to shed light on it, you know, much more thoroughly than I did. But what you're saying makes sense and it resonates for me. So thank you.
Andre.
Hello, Shani. What a difficult topic for you to be addressing. It takes a special soul to be able to do that. Listening to the narrative, one tends to focus on the victim whose hands were cut off. But I ask us to look at that child who inflicted that wound. From a psychological standpoint, is that a dead soul? As he continues to mature, to be able to inflict that with such impunity and disregard, it's as though there's nothing left in there to mature, to become, well, see if you can address that for us, because
Thank you for that question. I have a good answer for the question. And I hope people won't think it's too, self-promoting or whatever, but my answer is to try, if you can, to read the poem in the book that's titled The Child Soldier. There is a poem in the book titled The Child Soldier. It's a long poem. And I think it gives the whole arc, the whole trajectory of how this happens. If you're interested in this topic, but you don't have the time or the inclination to read a whole long nonfiction book about, child ex-combatants, you could read that poem and you will have a pretty good sense of how an ordinary boy who's living with his parents in a village, living a pretty ordinary life, reaches the point where he's acting as the person is acting in the poem I read. You will see from that person's testimony, because that child soldier testified. And there is some, rehabilitation and reintegration process. And of course, it's an open question. Can a person fully recover, or will they always carry, some level of impact from being involved in something like that? But I do think that child soldier poem captures it pretty close, where you can sort of see how the whole thing unfolds and how the person changes through being in a war situation, and being manipulated in various ways. Thank you for the question.
I mean, it seemed even in the poem that you read that in a way he might have displayed some kind of resistance, because there's something in it that reminded me something of when I was a kid, but where he was told to get a machete and he went, but he returned empty-handed. And then he said, he couldn't find the machete. He was told, well, then go get a knife.
Right.
So it's almost like maybe he thought, well, if I go back, there is none, maybe this won't happen. So I think that there are levels of resistance that even child soldiers try to, maybe early on, at least in their own experiences, but they're given drugs and so many things are done to, they're threatened themselves. And so
Thank you for that. Yeah, one thing I would like to mention that this touches upon is that I tried really hard in the book to have aspects of one person's story hinted at or touched upon in another person's story, not necessarily the specific individual, but the type of experience. So for example, in the poem that I read, it alludes to a young woman who was raped and captured. Then there's another poem in the book titled The Rape Survivor that tells her own experience of being raped and carried away as a forced wife. Forced marriage was one of the crimes that happened in this war. And this example with the child soldier is another example where in that first poem, you're hearing about the child soldier from this amputee's mother's perspective, but then there is another poem where you're hearing it from his perspective. So there's a lot of sort of crossover like that. And so I think if you read the whole book, my hope is that it gives you a pretty good sense of the major types of events that happen in the war. I mean, you're not going to know everything about the war. It was an 11-year war, but if you read the book, you're going to get a sense of kind of the major types of crimes that happened, recruitment of child soldiers, rape, forced marriage, amputations, killings, torture, and so forth, because it touches upon them in various ways from various perspectives, even though it's a short book.
I see there are two raised hands. I was also curious about the cover. I don't know if Popeye Solomon wants to speak to that, but
that'd be great.
I think it's just Andre and Professor Cole.
And Dr. Cole still has his hand up as well. I don't know if he still has a question or if he just forgot to.
You guys still have questions or new questions?
Pepe, will you be willing to answer some questions about the cover art?
You know,
We
it'd
can't
be an
hear you.
honor.
You have to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we hear you. And for those of
Perfect.
you who don't have the book yet, or you didn't see the invitation, this is the cover painting. It features the dress is the colors of the Sierra Leone flag, and the woman is Sierra Leonean, and she is peeling tape off of her own mouth. It's titled Free Speech. And whatever you want to say about it, Pepe.
And first and foremost, like I said earlier, this is a complete honor to be a part of, and it's incredible. And when you reached out to me to paint this, to me, it felt like the right thing to do, because going way back to when I was 10 years old in a refugee camp, and you met me and you saw my work, and then recommend for my family and I to be resettled to the United States, this was the greatest way I could pay you back in a way. So I'm happy I did, and I'm happy that it's been received well, and that it supports the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. I would tell you guys a little secret that's kind of funny, but it didn't feel funny at the time. We had a different painting that Pepe did, the same theme, the same idea. It was a woman with a gag over her mouth, with a scissors about to cut the gag off. So the same idea, empowering oneself to speak, freeing oneself to speak. And just when the book was about to go to press, the COVID and the anti-masking protests started, where people were ripping their masks off. And Suzanne and Pam at the publishers at Bucknell said, we can't have this painting anymore because it looks like people who are anti-maskers cutting their mask off. And I really wanted Pepe to be the cover artist, and I didn't know if he would have the time or inclination to make an alternate painting. And I was like, no, it doesn't look like a mask. It looks like a gag. And they were like, Shani, it looks like someone cutting their mask off. I really resisted. I did not want to face it, but I ended up asking like 5 friends, and all my friends agreed. They said, yeah, it really does. It looks like someone's cutting their mask off in protest. So I contacted Pepe, and I was like, and he was really, really busy at the time because his work is now being featured in museums and exhibits, and his career is really taking off in the past few years. And I was like, could you please do an alternate painting and do it and finish it in the next 5 days? And it was really iffy, but I quickly went out and bought the silver duct tape. And we were able to sort of, well, thank God. I'll tell you a secret. My daughter served as the model. We went outside of our front yard, took the photo, sent it immediately to Pepe, and did you finish the painting in about 5 days, 5-6 days?
So I managed to set aside some time one afternoon, and I just decided to forget everything else that was happening and just focus on the painting and get it done. So in a matter of a couple of hours, it was done, and I was ready to let go of it because I had to attend to my other work.
Yeah.
But the challenge is real, especially for an artist. You have to manage multiple things at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. One of the other little secrets is we really wanted the duct tape to be silver, because duct tape comes in other colors, but part of the underlying message, and it is a subtle message, it's not too obvious, but part of the underlying message is that if you look at it, can you also see yourself? Could you see something of your own experience? Could you get in touch with your own testimony, with your own untold story? Just can you consider it as a mirror? You hear from someone, and obviously that is that person's experience, but can their courage also put you in touch with, your own testimony. That's the idea of the silver mirror-like quality of the tape.
One more thing to that. The incredible thing about the metallic tape was around the time that you asked for me to repaint the painting, I was also going through some thoughts about my identity and specifically the refugee aspect of my identity. For the years leading to that moment, I was in a way ashamed to speak on that side of my identity. I just wanted to do things the way Americans would. So around that time, I was thinking, okay, it's time now for me to face this issue. And so I was going through those thoughts as I was working on my other work. And then you presented this to me with the metallic. So I thought, you know what, maybe I can explore this, the metallic nature of this whole thing. And that led me to Mylar emergency blankets, which in recent years has been associated with refugees and all of that. And now my current work is exploring that while using Mylar, which is also a reflective material. So I guess thank you.
Wow, thank you. Wow, I had not heard that story before. That's really meaningful to hear. Thank you. There might be some questions in the chat, but I also want to make sure we make space for those who are physically present at Bucknell, and also anybody who wants to raise their hand on the Zoom. Oh, Dr. Cole, and also Andre, another Andre. I have two people named Andre. Yes.
Alvarez, would you like to go? I saw you raise your
Hi.
and we'll return to
Hi, Shani, how are you?
Hi, we go back to 1980. We go back more than 40 years.
Yeah, we've
Worcester,
known each other a couple of
Massachusetts
weeks, huh?
poetry community. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, my pleasure. As always, I'm thankful for you being you. It's one of the interesting parts of you. You've always been you.
Oh, thank you, Andre.
You're not a fake.
Thank you.
A couple of things that I wanted to inquire about. One is, as you well know, is a person from an oral tradition. It's a Native American with deep roots in the world. The oral tradition has always been a part of my art, my work. The sonorous nature of language, the sound of it, as our mutual friend Esther Hagee would say, that great art is made from making the personal universal and the universal personal. So I know you're poetic here. So from hearing the testimony, from witnessing that space, how did the sound, how did the sonorous nature of that language influence not only the repetitive pattern of the poem that can be attributed to Stein or to, I forget the fellow, Charles Resnikov?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's one part of it that's perhaps more of the written world. But the sound, the sonorous nature of language really informs that, because I would say that musicality is what connects us. We can compare one Holocaust, one atrocity to the other, but the sound of language, the sound of waves of the world unites us. I'm wondering how that informed your not only your writing process, but your feeling, your soul.
Thank you so much. That's an excellent question. Well, I did experience vicarious trauma when I was working with this material, and even just living and working in Sierra Leone and Guinea and Liberia for 4 years. I often used the sound properties of the words as a consolation and comfort for myself. I would try to listen to alliteration, to rhythmicity, to assonance, the sounds, listening to the way sounds could play off of each other or repeat with variations. There is a musicality, and I found it could sometimes be containing, emotionally containing, to place the language within certain kinds of sound patterns, especially with alliteration. I found, and then when I started to make the book, I felt like that was really important, because otherwise it can be really, really overwhelming. The material can just be overwhelming, but I felt like using sound properties like rhyme, off rhyme, alliteration, rhythmicality, that actually serves as a container. It gives it a sort of, it just fulfills some sort of function. You see this even with babies, even with young babies. If a mother uses rhythm matching, vocal rhythm matching, and certain ways of using her voice, it can create a kind of containing effect or even a soothing effect. So I did use sound a lot in making the book, as well as part of my own healing process. Thank you for the question.
You're welcome. Good seeing you.
You too. I see Dr. Cole has a question.
Thank you, Shani. Not necessarily a question. I just want to make a quick follow-up to the question Andre asked, and then say something about the book cover, which Papi just so brilliantly talked about. I think the question of child soldier is a very complex one, if not a vexing one. And for me, this is so because the child soldier traumatizes, but is himself traumatized in the process. And what does it mean then to go through that process? And are there possibilities of transcendence from the trauma? I think, again, Aminata Fona has done very important work on this. She was drawing from the French psychologist. And I would like to sort of, if I can point Andrew to Boris Cyrulnik, the French psychologist who wrote The Psychology of Resilience. And I think Aminata Fona was drawing from Cyrulnik's theorization of trauma as being non-destructive, to the sense in which a traumatized individual is not damaged goods. There are possibilities of transcendence, there are possibilities of overcoming. And I think this is what is in many ways being demonstrated in the culture or other context of Sierra Leone, to have gone through such horrible atrocities for 10 years. Even the will to simply live is itself a clear manifestation of the resilience of Sierra Leonean people to overcome and to have, to sort of start a new phase of life. To Papi Solomon, I love the cover, but something caught my attention. I wasn't sure whether that was intentional in your artistry. When I looked at the photo of the young woman, I saw some kind of interesting dynamic between ripping off the duct tape in itself, symbolic of liberation, giving voice, a willingness to speak, or putting on the tape itself. That is some kind of self-silencing determination to not speak. And what would it mean to not speak, to choose to not speak, or to rip off the tape, a desire to speak? So I was thinking you were playing on this kind of dynamic between ripping off and putting on, and what that says about the circumstance or the circumstances in which the survivors find themselves, and the structure of the society that facilitates or mitigates against that. Maybe I was reading too much into that. So that is it. Was it a process of ripping it off or a process of putting it on? And I thought it was an interesting dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
To me, but that I think I wanted to, in a very subliminal fashion, add that duality to it. My work, with my work, I tried to not present everything beforehand, and to allow people the chance to explore and investigate the visuals that are being presented to them, to come to the conclusion, right? At the end of the day, I do what I do, and I allow people the chance to do what they do and hopefully get to the same conclusion. And I think it's very important when speaking about free speech, sometimes it's okay not to speak. That's also good. but when one chooses to speak, that should also be celebrated. At this very moment.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much. And thank you to Bucknell University Press and Suzanne Gio for all of the work in putting this together. I don't know if there's one final question.
There's actually some questions in the chat. And I also, is Suzanne still on the Zoom? Because I wanted to.
She is still here. She's in the room with us.
Oh, you're in the room. That's why I couldn't see you. Okay, Suzanne, did you have anything you wanted to say? You did so much to bring this book to fruition. You really stepped up and made it happen. Is there anything you wanted to say? You don't have to, but I just want to make the opportunity available if you want to.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Shani, I just wanted to say thank you. It's so great to see you for one thing and to sort of meet you in this way and just say thank you for your grace and patience throughout the process and for bringing this very important work to Bucknell University Press. And I also wanted to say thank you to Dr. Cole for providing the foreword and for attending today and for your excellent comments. And it's also very exciting for me to meet Pepe Solomon in this venue. I can't thank you enough for the beautiful artwork that you provided at such short notice. I think it made, the content of the book was already so important. And I think the artwork makes the physical, the physical artifact such a treasure. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who was involved and to Simone and Michelle and the Griot Center and certainly Carmen in her absence for making this event possible today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can we stay on for maybe 5-6 more minutes just to take a couple questions from the chat?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much for the extra time. So I see a question from Ish Makapela. He was a leader in the South African anti-apartheid struggle, a really major figure in that struggle. And it's amazing that you're here today. We worked together in 1986. And Ish, I don't know if you want to ask your own question or if you want me to just paraphrase it from the chat. But it says, did some of the people that suffered loss of limb, dignity, or loved ones later find it worthwhile following the end of the war? So I think I touched upon that question to some extent, saying that most people found, there's very, very low rate of suicide in Sierra Leone. You hardly see people commit suicide. So most people do find one way or another to still go on with life. And rebuild and try to rebuild their lives as best they can. So I think that's what I would say in response to that question. And then there was a question.
There was one by Rakik. This is talking about psychology and what you think the experience of testifying on processing the trauma for those who participated. What do you think about the experience of testifying?
Oh, thank you, Ricky. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it's interesting because my views on that are actually different from what a lot of the popular views are. A lot of the popular views are that it's inherently, quote unquote, re-traumatizing to testify. And for the most part, I did not find that at the special court. I thought the word re-traumatizing was sometimes getting misused. It would be used when someone would burst into tears. So a witness would be testifying, they would cry or sob, and people would say, oh, they're re-traumatized. But I think sometimes a person was crying as part of their expression of what happened to them. And it was important that they showed the impact of what happened to them. It doesn't mean that it was bad for them to testify. We interviewed the witnesses afterwards, and the vast majority of them said that they appreciated the opportunity to testify, even when what they were testifying about was painful or hard. And the judges would usually immediately take a break after 1 minute. Someone would start to cry and they would say, okay, let's take a recess. But I think sometimes it's really important to sit and be with that person as they are crying for a few minutes, because otherwise you're missing some of the truth of their experience. If you're just going to shut that down and not allow that at all, obviously, if the person wants to take a break, they should be given a break. But, you know, maybe it's important to hear the depth of what they went through, you know. So, but in general, I think the vast majority of people, I think, were glad that they came and testified, even if it was hard to do so. That's a good question. Thank you for the question. There are other questions from the chat that I didn't get to. So it looks like we got to most of them. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming, for giving such a good quality of attention, and for supporting this work. And I encourage you to support the other books that the Griot Institute is bringing out and has brought out. And I want to thank you again, Simone and Michelle, for really making today's event happen. And again, Pape and Dr. Cole for the wonderful forward, and also Remy Raji, who gave me a wonderful blurb for the book. And I see also, I did not notice this before, just in this last final moment, I see that one of my supervisors from when I first started working in the West African sub-region in 2004 in Guinea, Jean-Baptiste Mukulu, Dr. Jean-Baptiste Mukulu, who now works with the UN, he's from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I think he's here on the Zoom. I see are you here, Jean-Baptiste, or your name is here? I don't know if you're still.
Yes, Johnny.
You're here. Why don't you let us see you? Why don't you say hello?
Yeah.
Or you could put your camera on. But anyway, hello. It's good to see you. You lived and worked in Sierra Leone as well as Guinea and Liberia. Do you have any comment or question or anything?
Thank you very much, Dr. Shani. I am sorry that I was in the traffic and I joined the conversation late, so I missed part of the testimonies that you were giving. I have been listening to the questions and these conversations. So thank you very much for this. The comment I was making is that listening to what you were saying has brought my memory back to the work we used to do in West Africa, both in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, with the refugees in the CVT mental health, community mental health program. And we use to leave all the souvenir of the war atrocities through all the stories that our clients used to tell us. And it was like the war that stopped already used to continue in our conversation in order to help these clients to heal, to go to a healing process. And it was sometimes and very often very hard to to listen to all these testimonies and seeing people who were crying, both adolescents, children, adolescents, boys and girls, and men and women, also who were mostly sharing what they went through in order to get into a healing process. And this is really what I am, for us here, this is almost after 10 p.m. So I think like my evening has been going through all these memories in the work we used to do in West Africa. So thank you for sharing this and helping others to understand what used to be the work, and also mostly part of this work that you did in with the UN system in helping these victims that needed to get some reparation through the court. Thank you very much for your testimonies.
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. Thank you very,
Over
very
to you.
Yeah. So I think I just see like one more question that's from Dr. Gillian Frank. You asked about what I would hope readers learn or experience from the book. I mean, that's a question that could have a long answer, but because of time, I'll just keep it pretty short and simple. I guess I would say that as I touched upon a few minutes ago, I hope that people will take away from the book an awareness not only of the trauma of the war, 11-year civil war that engulfed the whole country and even the region, but also the resilience and the dignity and the courage of the people, and the strength of spirit of the people. And also, I would hope that after reading the book, people would have a pretty good understanding of some of the basic history and knowledge of the war, because it's a war that is not known about by a broad North American public, at least. So I would hope that people would then be familiar with some of the events, and even more broadly, how a country slides into war, which is a big subject that Aminata Forna has written a lot about in her novels and essays. And I think I do touch upon a little bit in the introduction, the role of diamonds, diamonds and selling of diamonds in order to gain the money to prosecute the war, you know, was a big factor. So I touch upon some of those issues in the introduction too. So I think I addressed everybody's questions. I'm really, really grateful to have this opportunity to be with all of you today. And it just means so much that you're willing to take time out of your busy schedules to come to an event like this and to come and support the Griot Institute, support the work that they do, support Bucknell University Press, and support this book. So thank you again. And it's really good to see everyone or hear from everyone. And I hope our paths will cross again. Take care for now.
Unmute and clap.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if anyone would like to publish with Bucknell University Press in the Griot series, please.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Simone. I almost forgot that the press was incredibly supportive and kind to me. I had heard all kinds of horror stories about other publishers, and my experience with both the Griot Institute book series as well as Bucknell University Press more generally was just really, really positive and supportive. So if you are thinking of writing a book, yeah, I just want to second what Simone was just saying. Consider submitting your book to either or both the Griot Project, which is a series within Bucknell University Press, or Bucknell University Press more broadly.
There's one more burning question from Emily Marsick.
Oh, Emily. Oh, hi, Emily.
Or maybe that was accidental. You meant to
I
clap. but-
didn't recognize you. It's been a long time. Good to see you.
Okay, we can't hear you, but we get it. You're just maybe waving hello.
You need to unmute. You need to unmute.
I'm sorry, I just had
Okay.
the wrong reaction up. It
Wrong
was just a
emoji.
round of applause. So wonderful
thank
work,
you.
Shani. Thank you for sharing this.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you.
We hope you all have a good evening. Good night.
Can we save the chat?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, terrific.